Hi, I'm Natalie Chasse, and we're about to make the most easiest, fabulously delicious risotto that I've had in a very long time. So I'm very excited to share it. I will tell you a little bit more about it, of course, and give you a sort of, lay of the land of how it's gonna roll. But essentially, what we've got is a risotto laden with gorgonzola cheese, parmesan, fresh thyme, a little bit of lemon, lots of white wine, served with more fresh thyme and some honey roasted walnuts. The reason I love it so much is often I find with risotto, it can just be kind of like a very repetitive thing to eat. It's like forkful after forkful of the same thing, and there's often not enough, for me at least, variation in flavor and texture. And this is like a risotto of dreams, really, that kind of just debunks what you would think of a normal risotto that is kind of just repetitive and a little bit boring. So what makes it so great, I think, is a few things. We're going to use lots of white wine, more than what a normal recipe would tell you to, and I think that gives it really incredible flavor. We're going to use a little bit of lemon as well for some extra acidity. We've got gorgonzola, a really nice, bitey, spicy gorgonzola, which gives great depth of flavor. Of course, as with all risotto, we will be using lots of Parmesan cheese. Lots of fresh thyme, okay? Not just like a couple of sprigs, but we're gonna have lots of fresh thyme running through the actual dish as we cook it. And we're also gonna serve with fresh thyme on top. And I think one of the key things to this whole dish are these honey roasted walnuts. They add such great texture to the top of the dish. Obviously, that sweetness balances really nicely against the intensity of the gorgonzola and the lots of the white wine and the lemon, but they're also bringing in that really nice warming buttery crunch to the dish. So each bite essentially is layered and has something going on, and it's exciting. Okay, so I clearly adore this risotto. I hope you do too. It's easy to make. And the first thing we're going to start off with are our walnuts. We want to roast them in a little bit of honey. So your ovens should be on roughly 180 to 200, depending on how hot your oven is. Mine's on 200. And all we're going to do is add a nice drizzle of honey, okay, to about a large handful of walnuts. We're going to crush them up, right? So you don't need a huge amount of walnuts per plate. We're going to be making about enough risotto for 4 people, 4 large-ish portions, which is about 1 cup of the carnaroli rice, which we're going to use. But I love this one. It's so easy. There's like the only thing that we're really chopping today is 1 onion, and that's it, okay? So spread your walnuts out with that good generous drizzle of honey, and then we are going to get them into a nice hot oven and just set a timer now for like, if your oven's hot, set a timer for like 7 minutes, but just keep an eye on them, okay? They could either burn quickly or take ages to cook. I don't know why that happens, but that's just what happens sometimes, okay? So keep an eye on them. And then when you start to smell them, probably means they're ready as well. All right, so honey walnuts are in. They're gonna get caramelized and golden and crunchy and all of the things, okay? So the next thing we are gonna work on is just dicing a shallot. So what we're gonna do, dice our shallot, we're gonna toast the rice, we're gonna fry the shallot in butter, then we're gonna toast our rice, then we're gonna start that nice process of adding our white wine, letting it reduce, adding our stock, letting the stock reduce as we add more. The cooking time on my risotto is about 16 minutes. I like it to have a little bit of bite. But follow whatever the cooking time is of the brand that you are using, and you can always undercook it by a couple of minutes. Before we actually get started on chopping this, I do have one thing to say. It is in your ingredients note, your utensils note, but you can either do this in a pot, or I'm going to be using a sort of deeper frying pan, but whatever you have, just make sure it has a lid, okay? Because we're actually going to take the risotto off the heat a couple of minutes before the actual desired cooking time, just with a big knob of butter, and you just let it sit and continue to cook on its own for a couple of minutes, but you want to do that with the lid on, okay? So whatever you're using, just make sure it has a lid. If it doesn't, it's also not the end of the world, okay? So let's get now back to our shallot. I have a giant banana shallot, which actually I can feel from that there's 2 in there. So we're just going to chop off the sort of furry tail end. And then if you are dealing with a giant one like me, and there's actually 2 shallots in one, let's just try separate those instead of slicing straight through it first. You can also absolutely do this with just with a plain brown onion, but I find that there is a nice sort of elegant, see, 1, 2, but we're only going to use 1. There's a nice sort of elegant sweetness to a banana shallot that just obviously lends itself really, really well to a risotto. But brown onion, white onion works completely fine. I would just definitely say do not use a red onion for this risotto at least, or for most risottos, but definitely for this one. Okay, so I just want to get that extra layer off. So I'm just going to slice and peel, and then let's finely dice this, okay? We do want it finely diced because it's literally one of the only sort of core ingredients. And the best way to do it, I always use a nice long serrated knife to make long incisions from that sort of tail end of your shallot or your onion all the way down. And then we just cut across the cross section. And you will be left with nice little pieces. I always have a larger knife to hand to kind of run over it again with something larger, just to make sure it is very nicely finely chopped. Okay, but otherwise that's looking pretty good. I would say, like, because there's minimal ingredients in this. However, we're using a really smart selection of ingredients, that there's maximum flavor, but there's minimal work to do in terms of chopping, in terms of, like, you know, all the different components. It's relatively straightforward. So take your time on the small details, like making sure your shallot is finely chopped, okay? And making sure you don't burn those walnuts. That is essential. Okay, so I'm just going to give this an extra going over just to make sure it's really nice and fine. And then we are going to cook these in lots of butter until they're really nice and soft, golden. And we're going to cook them relatively gently, okay? So let's give it a little more love on the chopping front. Okay, great. So shallots look good. And now what you're going to do, we're going to get some butter. All right, a generous knob of butter. We'll use butter twice. We're going to use the butter now to fry the shallots. And we're going to use a good knob of butter at the end to kind of work through the whole dish. So heat-wise, let's get the hob onto a medium heat. And when that butter is melted, that risotto is going to go in. Now, I find risotto a very lovely therapeutic thing to cook. That kind of process of toasting the rice and then slowly adding your liquids and adding more only once the previous amount is reduced. It's nice and slow, and you can take your time with it. There are a few different ways we could do this. Because I'm teaching this class kind of from start to finish, I am going to be, when we start cooking the risotto, we'll do a few other things. There's not that much to do. When the risotto starts cooking in the liquid, it's just a case of slowly stirring and adding more stock, right? But there's a few things that we can do together whilst that's happening, i.e. grate all of that Parmesan and actually take the time to pick a really legitimate amount of thyme off the stems, okay? Which can actually be a frustratingly laborious process sometimes, but it is worth it, okay? But if you were doing this on your own, you could have everything prepared, i.e., you know, this is chopped, your thyme is ready to go, your Parmesan's ready to go, and then you can kind of get cooking and just add things as you need them. But we'll be kind of doing everything as we go. Okay, so that is slowly starting to melt. I'm also going to add a little olive oil to this. So butter and olive oil, I know. Luxurious. And as soon as that's melted and there's a little bit of heat in your frying pan, a little sizzle, we can go in and add our shallots or onion. So let's let that melt. And then we can also talk risotto quantities. We can talk preparing risotto in advance, which I did recently, and I have a method that works. So we can chat that. Okay. So that butter looks like it's just gently starting to melt. So I'm going to throw these in. Lovely. And I really like to cook the shallots or the onion until they're really, really soft and golden. Not burnt by any means on the outside, but really, really, really softened, okay? So you can take your time with that step as well. So just get them nicely coated in the butter and the oil. All right. And then just let them do their thing, okay? We'll give them a good few minutes. And I'm going to make my heat just a little higher because it needs a little bit of extra heat, I believe. Then we're good. Okay. The smell of shallots and butter cooking. Mwah. Okay, so here's my tip. Whilst these reduce, I'm going to tell you, I had to make recently a large batch of risotto for an event and kind of obviously serve it all at once. But I didn't want to make the risotto fully in advance, obviously, because it would be overcooked and stodgy. And I didn't necessarily want to make it in the moment because I had a relatively long cooking time on the brand of risotto that I was using. So a little tip, if you're having a dinner party and you don't necessarily want to be in the kitchen stirring your risotto whilst your guests are, enjoying themselves, drinking wine, having snacks, you want to be present. What you can do is follow your entire step of cooking the risotto, right? So the shallots, the butter, toasting your rice, adding the white wine, adding about half of the stock, okay? So what you do is you actually cook your risotto. Let's say the cooking time on your risotto packet is 18 minutes. You're gonna cook your risotto until the 9-minute mark, or the 10 or 11 or 12-minute mark. And then you're immediately gonna transfer your risotto from the pot, okay, whatever you're cooking in, into a cool oven tray, something flat, a Pyrex dish, whatever will fit in your fridge, but something cold. And you're immediately gonna get your risotto nice and cold in the fridge, right? That obviously stops the rice from cooking almost immediately, because you may cook it to the 9-minute mark and then just let it sit in the frying pan, but that's not what you want to do either. You want to stop it from cooking. So that when you then actually go to making your risotto, you get it back in the frying pan and you continue to cook it as you would, okay, for the last remaining 8 minutes, 7 minutes, 9 minutes, as you would do a normal risotto. And it works. I did it. It had really good bite. It was not overcooked. It really, really worked. So that was an exciting moment for me because I hadn't actually tried that technique before. But essentially, cook your risotto halfway through, transfer it to something cool, get it in the fridge, and then finish cooking it later on. Of course, if you're making a small amount, you can do it in the moment, but for larger quantities, it really worked. Okay, so shallots are looking nice and softened and golden. Let's talk rice. I'm gonna make a portion for about 4 roughly, which is about 1 cup of rice, okay? That will make 4 starter-sized portions, roughly. Oh, wow. That was perfectly a cup of rice left in there. So what you want to do with your risotto rice, you want to get it in to a frying pan, or whatever you're doing, whatever you're using. Mix it immediately with the onions. And before we start to add any liquid, you actually want to give the rice an opportunity just to toast a little bit, just for a few minutes. Just let it toast, okay? It releases flavor. It allows for a nice, almost like nuttiness, a little good, amount of nutty flavor to start coming through. So just let it sit there like that without moving it around too much whilst it toasts, okay? Then the next thing we do with the risotto is start to add wine first. Then when the wine reduces, we go down that route of slowly adding our stock. Now, roughly, it's 1 cup of rice, let's say, to 2 cups of stock, plus minus, maybe more. I don't necessarily like to do it that way. I like to always have enough stock on hand, okay, so that I'm constantly feeding the risotto with liquid when it evaporates, to the point of the risotto being cooked. So you don't want to get to a point where you've actually added all of your stock, it's reduced, but your risotto is still too bitey. So I think it's always good to have that extra liquid, that extra stock on hand should you need it to cook your risotto. Okay, so heat-wise, we're still on that medium. I'm seeing a nice bit of color, just a little bit of light browning, light toasting on those grains of rice. I will say, having now made risotto with a variety of rices, I often use this nice 5-grain risotto rice, which is like a mix of arborio and spelt. It's really delicious. But I would say carnaroli is your ultimate risotto rice, okay? So that's got nice color on it. I can smell that it's like, nicely toasted. And we're just gonna go in with a generous, do not measure this because it will reduce so quickly, a generous glug of white wine. And from this point onwards is when you start to roughly time the cooking of your risotto, okay? I'm going to turn the heat down just a touch. So I'm not going to time mine because I roughly know how long it's going to take by how it looks, by how the consistency changes, by how it tastes. So I'm not going to do that, but you absolutely can. We've used a generous amount of white wine, okay? And that is how it should be. I adore the taste of white wine in a risotto. I don't understand the concept of adding a couple of tablespoons of white wine, letting it reduce, and then you can not really taste it anymore. Like, I don't understand the point. So I may be right, I may be wrong, but that's just my personal opinion, my personal preference, okay? So once that white wine has reduced, which should happen relatively quickly, as you're seeing here, okay, we can start to slowly add stock, okay? I'm gonna give that just a little bit more time to reduce. And then when we start on our stock journey, we don't do it all at once, okay? You slowly add splash by splash, ladle by ladle of stock until it reduces, and then you add more, and you just keep going until you have reached that full cooking time, okay? I'm gonna check on the walnuts, which I almost forgot about the walnuts, which I do every time. So I'm really glad I remembered, and they look good. I'm ready to take them out, I think. Okay, stunning. So that honey is like bubbled up. They look gorgeous. I am gonna transfer them whilst the honey is still hot. I just wanna transfer them. Actually, I don't need to transfer them to a cool plate. But if you have done them in like a Pyrex dish and you don't wanna get honey on the Pyrex dish or anything like that, then it's absolutely fine to move them somewhere a bit cooler. But the honey is still really soft from the oven, right? So your walnuts are gonna look like they're very easy to move around and very malleable, but trust me, as they sit here and as this cools, they're gonna harden, they're gonna crystallize, they're gonna caramelize, then we're just gonna crush them up, okay? But as they caramelize, as they harden, as they sort of crystallize, that honey will most likely get stuck to whatever you've cooked them in, okay? So if you don't want them to be kind of stuck in whatever oven-proof dish you've cooked them in, you can transfer them to a plate. Okay, so white wine has reduced. We are going to go in with our very first ladling splash of stock, okay? It's on a gentle simmer, okay? It's not too high, nothing crazy. You can take it slow. So whilst that's all happening, we will come back to some butter shortly. The gorgonzola, the parmesan, the butter, and the thyme will all go in at the end, and then we're going to put the lid on and let it cook, okay? So what we can do now is start to grate our parmesan. It's always good to have a nice generous amount of Parmesan ready to go with a risotto, okay? So I'm gonna get my grater, which is right here. Okay, so we can just start to prepare the rest of the ingredients. So when it comes time, we are in a good place, okay? So just grate your cheese. In terms of quantity, lots. Lots is the answer. We're gonna be serving it with more grated Parmesan as well, okay? But cheese is an essential ingredient to a good, creamy, bitey, flavorful risotto, okay? So just take your time to get your cheeses in order. And then we're gonna move on to our thyme. We'll take our time with our thyme as well, because we wanna have lots available to us. So, of course, with Parmesan, we can always add more. This is, I definitely want more than this, so just keep going. And it's just nice to kind of get your prep done whilst that cooks, you know? And then just every so often you want to give it a stir, okay? The process of stirring is also what makes it nice and creamy and releases creaminess and starch from the grains, okay? Lovely. Okay. Now that's looking like it is ready for the next splash of stock. So I'm going to go in with that. Okay. Give that a good stir and then just let it simmer. Okay. So continue grating our Parmesan. Oh, I love this dish so much. It is really, really good. I do have on the platform already a risotto with radicchio, gorgonzola, thyme, hazelnuts. Some similar flavors, but some different flavors. But this one is quite different. I would say these honey walnuts, wow, make a huge difference to the dish and how it tastes and how it feels and how it looks. Okay, so that's probably enough for now. We can always add more. The gorgonzola we're going to break in with our hands. But what we can do now, as this also continues to cook, because the process of picking thyme can be a little laborious. All right, we are going to get lots and lots of fresh thyme off the stems, okay? I'm just going to turn my heat up ever so slightly. Great. In terms of quantity, look, a lot of recipes, like I'd say if you found like a recipe like this online, it would say, God, okay, I'm making such a mess, but I just want all my thyme in front of me. Oh, look at that. I already have some thyme ready to go. Okay, when it comes to thyme, I don't know why. A lot of recipes will say this kind of like minuscule amount of thyme for, you know, something like to me requires a lot of time, okay? So I'm gonna say we're gonna use a really generous amount. But let's just start picking, okay? So the way you wanna do it is just hold the top of your thyme stem and then just run your fingers down and you're left with the perfect buds. Like I said earlier, we're going to use thyme in the risotto and we're gonna plate with thyme as well. So we need a generous amount. It's the only herb that we're using. I really want that flavor to come through, okay? So if you have some buds of thyme that are kind of on a very nice malleable little end, you can use that little end point. But then you get to the bottom and it's quite sticky, quite twiggy. You definitely don't want to bring any of that into your dish, okay? So make sure that is all very much off. And again, just keep stirring as you go, okay? I'm ready to go in on the next splash. And if you feel like your stock is actually cooking away too quickly for the amount of cooking time of risotto that you have left, okay, take the heat down. I'm actually going to do exactly that. I know I just turned it up, but I've decided to take it down just a little bit based on what I'm seeing, because I still have a bit of cooking time left, but the stock's reducing quite quickly, which I don't necessarily want. Okay, so thyme. Take your time, get the thyme off the stems. Saving some. When we add it to the dish later, we'll make sure that we save some for plating. I really like this flavor to come through, wildly come through. Okay, if you're not a fan of thyme, by all means use less. But if, like me, you're really into it, go for it, okay? I've got so much in front of me, so I am, I don't know when I'm gonna stop, but let's intermittently stir as you go. That is important. Okay. And as reduces, which you'll only know on your end, you go in with that next splash. All right. Stirring, 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 stirring. We haven't added any salt yet. We will taste, we will see what we need when we get to the very end. The stock is salty. The gorgonzola's got quite a lot of salt to it. Parmesan is salty, so you might find you actually don't need much. But we'll see. Definitely going to use pepper. Pepper is essential for obvious peppery reasons. But yeah, I want to get a really sufficient amount of this herb here on my plate so when we throw it in, we're in a very good position and we're not like scrambling for herbs at the last minute, you know? Okay, so those are all done. And to be honest, once you've taken the useful part, the part of the thyme that you can actually use off the stem, there's often not a huge amount left, okay? So don't be disheartened if this process takes you ages, but it is worth it. And it's a nice thing to do whilst your risotto actually cooks. There is also very much a world where you do this in advance and you can actually add the fresh thyme to your risotto when you add the wine. So you can totally do that as well. Okay, but I want to get lots and lots and lots. And then I'm going to give that another stir, but that's starting to look really nice and creamy, and we haven't even added the creamy elements yet, right? And if you want at this point, you can have a taste and see how bitey it is and start to get an idea of how far along you are from, you know, from it being ready. If you like to feel it versus just going with the cooking time of the packet. We're almost there. So I'm going to add that, and I will add just a touch more, and then I'm going to bump that heat up now so that it gets going, and then I'm going to go in and add, so what I've got here is like a small handful of thyme. Probably going to want more, but I can just put that directly in. Just make sure you don't have any stems there, okay? So I'm going to throw that thyme in. Give that a stir. It was a generous amount, you can see. But trust me, it's worth it, okay? It's the main herb. It works so well against the gorgonzola. Just trust me. And the honeyed walnuts, it's fantastic. So let's let that finish cooking. We're almost there. I'm going to add the juice of 1 lemon. All right. There's my squeezer. I know we've got white wine, which is obviously nice and acidic in this dish, but the lemon also brings a really nice brightness to it. So I vote for the juice of 1 lemon. And then what's nice about adding the thyme at this point is that it really has sufficient time. Whenever I cook with thyme, I realize how often I use the word time in the clock sense. But now with this thyme in there, there is sufficient time for the thyme to really release its flavor into the rice. Okay, so just keep stirring and we are very close. So the next thing we're going to do is go in with Parmesan and gorgonzola. And then we will add a big knob of butter pop the lid on, take the heat off, and just let it sit, okay? In which time we will crush up our nuts, which have definitely softened. I mean, starting to harden, not softened. We want them to get crunchy. Let's try one. Yum. Okay, stir, stir, stir. If you want to have a taste and you know for sure that you want to add salt, do it now. That's totally fine. I'll do the same. But we obviously haven't added... Oh my God, that is so yummy. Okay, I'm going to go in. Parmesan. All of that Parmesan we grated, which was a relatively generous amount. Probably will add more. We'll definitely plate with more, that is for sure. Oh, and look at that instant dose of creaminess. Yum. Okay. So, stirring, stirring, stirring. Still stirring lots. I would then want us to go in and add the gorgonzola, okay? If you're sitting on the fence and you're not sure how much you want to add, start with less. You can always add more. It will melt directly into the rice, okay? So not to worry about that. But this is looking fantastic, creamy, gorgeous. I'm very happy with that. Okay, so let's go in with the gorgonzola. I know I like a pretty generous amount. I think this is about 200 and something grams. Just break it up, but you do want to avoid the skin, okay? So that part you can discard. So anyway you see that sort of outer shell, we do not need to use. So I'm gonna get maybe about half more of that in. I will then rinse my hands, give it a stir, have a taste, and then I think we are good to pop the lid on and let it finish cooking in that residual heat. So let me just rinse. All right, and we'll give that another stir. Oh my God, that looks so creamy and delicious. Wow. Yum. So now is a good time to taste and decide on salt, okay? But let's give that a good stir. Make sure everything is melted. And then we can most likely, we're in a good position to pop the lid on, take the heat off. It will still continue to cook. It will thicken up whilst we kind of clear our space and crush up those nuts and get a few more things ready. But let's give it a little taste for salt. It has got perfect bite. I'm taking the heat off. It does not need to cook any further. I'm really happy with the amount of gorgonzola in there, so I'm not going to use that last bit. We will plate with more of that fresh thyme. Let's just give it a good stir. Now, this is where, based on what you're seeing in front of you, if it is super duper creamy like mine, you don't actually necessarily need to put in that extra little bit of butter. I'm making the judgment call not to do that because mine is actually super creamy. There's still a generous amount of stock in there that will probably will reduce as it sits with the lid on. So I'm gonna let it sit for a couple minutes because I want it to be nice and soft and creamy. So I don't know if I'm going to add the butter. We'll see in a minute. But this is a nice way to cook, right? Like if yours looked kind of stodgy and a little bit dry, then absolutely go in with a large knob of butter, pop it in there and pop the lid on, okay? But rather, it's always best to kind of cook by actually seeing and looking and making a call, a judgment call on what something needs instead of just following a recipe and adding the butter because it says to add butter, right? So let's actually, before we get our hands dirty with these walnuts, which we will just break up with our fingers, which are getting really nice and crunchy and they really fall apart easily. Let's get just a little bit more time for plating because I actually used all of mine in there. We don't need a huge amount to plate, just a nice little nod to the green, a nice little pop of green on each plate. We also definitely want to plate on something flat, okay? This risotto, actually I think most risottos look good on a flat plate, but this particularly looks really nice on something flat because we want to stud those walnuts around so that you can really see them well. Okay, so I'm just getting a little bit more of the herb here. Oh gosh, there is so much that has fallen, and great, that's my job done. Okay, so that is enough for plating for sure, because there is a really generous amount in the risotto as well. So I'm gonna make some space, I'm gonna get some plates out, and as that risotto finishes to reduce in the pot, okay, as all those flavors come together. By the way, mine didn't need any salt. I don't know if yours did. We're gonna put a little bit of pepper on top of each plate, but if you want to put pepper through the whole thing, you can as well. We will finish plating with a grating of Parmesan, our walnuts, the fresh thyme, a drizzle of olive oil, and a bit of pepper. So we are done with chopping boards. We will keep our spatula, but I'm gonna move this out of the way. Okay. Just make some space. So we are working with a nice clean station to make a beautiful plate of the gorgeous risotto that we have just made, which I can tell is just creamy and fantastic. And then I'm going to choose some nice flat plates. Let's crush up these walnuts, which really just do with your hands, okay? So you just don't, we don't need to pulverize them, right? We just want to casually break them up. It's actually really nice to come across a relatively large piece, you know, with each forkful. So I'd say each walnut can roughly be broken up into 4 pieces, okay? And they should be sticky and sweet and buttery and crunchy by now, okay? You can see what happens when they kind of harden. Once when they come out of the oven, they're super soft. And then as soon as they cool down, all that honey like seizes up. Oh God, it's good. I love, love, love these honeyed walnuts on this dish. I am really genuinely obsessed with it. I've got a few that are stuck to the bottom. Okay, so if you need to just get a spoon and unstick them, do that. They're still really nice and kind of crunchy meets chewy, which I'm happy with. Okay, that looks really good. These look really good, rather. Okay, happy with those. Good to go. A little bit of fresh thyme is good to go. We've got our Parmesan, we've got a grater. Let's see how this risotto is doing, okay? Let's give it a good stir. It is really gorgeous and creamy, okay, which is exactly what you want. So happy with the way that looks, wow. Okay, so yeah, I didn't need the butter in the end. Happy with that. All you're gonna do now is get a spoon or a sort of flat, a spoon or a ladle, okay? And take some of that risotto to the center of your flat plate, okay? And you're just going to get it in the center. We're gonna do like starter-ish size portions and then just smooth it out, okay? But look at that creaminess. So you might look at that, like if you actually look at the pot, you might think, oh no, that's not fully reduced. That is perfect. It's just plain and simple, delicious, creamy risotto with rice that still has really good bite. Okay, that heat was off, by the way, the whole time, just in case that was missed. But I like to do a sort of flat circle like this. Then you can kind of texture it up a little bit, break it up as you see fit. We still have obviously lots of fresh thyme that's coming through there. I'll move this one out of the way. We can decide which color we prefer, but I want to get some more fresh thyme on the plate. All right, I want to get some more parmigiano on the plate. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. We're going to do a little bit of black pepper, as discussed, just a pinch, or a grinding if you're using a mill. Okay, and then just use your hands to dot your walnuts, your sticky, sweet, crunchy, roasted honey walnuts, kind of all over, okay, so that each bite, or every few bites, is just textured and crunchy and sweet and gorgeous, really. So however much or however little as you like, but I would say more rather than less. And always just finish off with a nice little drizzle of olive oil, just to bring a bit of color and zhuzh back in there. But that is it, okay? It looks simple. It may not look like the most exciting flavor profile visually because it's kind of beige, but it is sensationally delicious. There is so much depth of flavor going on here between the white wine and the gorgonzola, and then of course all of that texture with those honeyed walnuts. It is a sensational risotto. Enjoy.